Hi, folks. You're with Tacitus today at your Pushback channel. And in this live stream, I'd like to talk about sports competition involving not only gender crossovers, but also intergender sports and how it's being managed and thrust upon us politically, and what appears to be at least an effort to destabilise and undermine Western society, and again, pitting the genders and the races against one another and all that sort of thing. So definitely an effort to destabilise and undermine. But the only real effect it seems to have, it's dressed up as equality and equity and all that sort of thing. But the only effect these this gender crossover in sports is having is to turn boys into pansies. It doesn't seem to have any other effect. I mean, you can say it butchers up some of the girls, but the particular effect is to pansy-fy the boys, or certainly in my view. So, and I guess I'd written this script or quite some time ago, and sort of part finished it and then hadn't followed it up. But there's been a recent MMA fight, and one of the participants, as I understand it at least, is a man claiming to be a woman. So given that's a bit of a story going around at the moment, I dusted this script off and thought I'll give it a run, and added a few paragraphs to sort of finish it off. But what we hear less about, I guess, in this overall thing is how girls are being encouraged or pushed, if you like, to go into boys' sports, and the incredible extent, and I mean the remarkable extent, the money, the time, the effort, the commitment to pushing girls to go into boys' sports. And in order to rig, fix, and artificially stack the deck, just so they can say that it's been equality, and seeing girls beating boys at physical sports and physical contact sports and so on. But the stage management and the orchestration is just mind-boggling. So let's have a little look at that as well. So this is quite a pernicious and not well discussed issue. That Western woke as shit governments are actually paying sports clubs, giving them taxpayer dollars to artificially rig it so that transgenders and that can come into and compete in girls' tournaments, but particularly girls competing in boys' tournaments. So surely only the totally insane will go to such lengths to twist reality and outcomes in such a way. But we live in insane times, so maybe it's not such a surprise. In some states in Australia, men's sports are not allowed to be held, even amateur or private club, unless a minimum of 10% of the participants are women. And there are quite serious fines for not having. So you have an absurd situation where, say, for example, a men's soccer club is having a game or a practice game or something like that. They have to somehow find 10% women. So you have this absurd thing where 40-year-old men are calling up their 15-year-old daughters and trying to bribe them with all sorts of goodies to say, hey, you have to come along. Yeah, just stand on the sidelines, just be in the general vicinity, so they can comply with the law. The reverse is not the case, though. Transgenders can have their own matches where women and girls can have their own. It's only men's sports that have to comply with this requirement. So again, it gives you the very anti-male flavour of it all. The effect of this, though, and I'll talk about more of this later on, is that the men who are serious about these sports or any sports, and when they have this forced upon them, they just give up the sport. They just walk away. So that leaves the less competitive, the less capable, the pansies behind. Whereas the better players, they just can't be bothered anymore. So they just leave the sport and go off or do something else. So many years ago, I was collecting my son from school for a dental appointment, and while waiting, I noticed boys and girls playing football supervised by what looked like a very woke female teacher. It struck me as rather odd because the girls were very stoutly built. They were big, burly girls, while the boys were obviously selected so as to offer the girls minimal competition. The boys all of them were little, skinny, frail little pansies in poor health, premature babies that never sort of got over it, asthmatics. You couldn't have got a less sporting capable bunch of boys. And again, when you compare them with the quite burly and much sportier girls, you could see that it was a very contrived sort of outcome. But even so, the boys weren't doing too badly, and they actually looked the better side from what I could see. So the teacher still had to stack the deck by disallowing goals they scored, and even calling out to the boys and scolding them for not letting the girls win. I don't know what sort of quality of education this is going to inculcate in the people of the future. Girls feeling entitlement they have to be allowed to win, and boys terrified that they might win. So this is the woke universe, how and where they stack the deck and rig the game and still demand that the boys sort of roll over. Anyway, the teacher sort of saw me looking, and I've come from work, so I'm dressed in my my sharp suit and all that sort of stuff. So the teacher comes over and has a brief chat and rather sheepishly sort of said to me that this was really a girls' confidence building program. It wasn't actually sports, it was just confidence building, so girls can realise and understand that they can beat frail little pathetic pansy boys in a sporting match, which is hardly a and the poor little boys, some of them, they had like domineering mother written all over their faces. I suggested maybe they weren't going to be the problem. It's going to be the big boys from out in the tenderloins and the poor suburbs. They're the ones that really are going to need this message, assuming anyone does. But she looked at me and just said, "They're boys," and shrugged and walked off. So just the fact that they're males, good enough. But these little frail pansy boys, they're never going to be a threat to women now or any time in the future. So those little boys were just suitable cannon fodder for this macabre social re-engineering or girl supremacy program. I wonder if the parents knew. But there are other examples of where this is happening, not just in contact sports or sports generally, but also in things like martial arts. So at a martial arts tournament, the juniors tend to sort of go first in the day, then the over 18s go later, and so on. So I noticed the tournament organisers were putting champion girls with 5+ years tournament experience and putting them in to compete with beginner boys. Somehow they were managing to convince these pudgy, overweight, unfit, timid, uncoordinated 11, 12-year-old boys with barely any experience or practice in martial arts, competing for the very first time, which if you ever competed in a martial arts tournament is a bit awe-inspiring. They call your name and you go to the mat and all this sort of stuff. So these very unfit, very nervous boys, they were getting them to enter tournaments to compete against very experienced older champion girls, and that seemed to be odd. Now, senseis, that's the coaches in martial arts, the senseis don't normally do this. Beginners only compete against other beginners, and students who are very early on in the cycle, they're just beginning or just starting out, they're generally discouraged from competing in tournaments until they've reached at least a certain standard of competence. So it's very rare that you'd even have these sort of boys, or anyone for that matter, entering tournaments with this level of expertise, and certainly wouldn't put them up against much better qualified ones. The whole idea of these tournaments is you're competing against people that you're more or less equally matched with. So these boys, these pudgy, overweight, uncoordinated boys, were being delivered up to these champion girls just to be beaten up. I mean, one girl who was a state girls champion was quite ruthless. I mean, she must have had daddy issues or something, but she was clearly enjoying beating the crap out of these bewildered, very unfit boys. Now, in a match, if one competitor is clearly superior, the referees stop the fight. They just award it based on superiority or clear superiority. But in this case, they weren't. They were letting the fights go on, even though the boys were having the crap kicked out of them. So this was obviously a planned, orchestrated, set-up thing. Referees don't do that. They're quick to stop the fight in the event there's one who's obviously superior, but in this case they didn't. So they were letting the fights go on. Now, just to give you some idea of the effect of this, one boy got a broken arm, another got a dislocated shoulder. So this was all done. So some fake new bullshit social new world order could be inflicted on the populace. How did they even convince these boys to go into the tournaments and get the parents convinced? It's quite beyond me. Now, if these state champion girls been up against state champion boys in their own weight category, they wouldn't have had a chance. But this was not allowed to happen in downtown Wokesville. In a wrestling tournament, a very fit girls champion, very fit, was pitted against a pasty-faced, hunched, narrow-shouldered, scrawny boy with hardly any wrestling experience and minus confidence. The girl won, which is obviously the pre-arranged script, and then the sports teachers in the hall cheered and danced jigs, giving each other high fives that the girl had won. What complete bullshit. A light breeze could have blown over this young boy. Where did they find him? I mean, how could you find someone that sort of unqualified to go into a match like this? How did they convince him to be offered for on the altar of sacrifice like this? It's quite beyond me. Did they bribe him, or was he too stupid and didn't realise, or what? Hand delivering the most unathletic boy in the whole universe just so girls can be seen to win, it seems to be all the rage. In another martial arts tournament with the media in tow, a girl who was the national judo champion in the 125-pound, or it's about 8.5 stone class, I guess, was put in with a group of physically and mentally handicapped boys, handicapped, who were all beginners. The champion girl beat all the handicapped boys, which is hardly a surprise. But it was recorded by the media as a fair competition, evenly matched, with the girl winning using girl power alone. It was a sick twisting of reality, all for insane propaganda purposes. But the actual reality is quite different. In another martial arts, if this is a pre-tournament, a warm-up tournament, a 19-year-old state champion girl, and she's 168 centimetres or 5'7" tall, 225 pounds, who'd also conferred in the National Jiu-Jitsu Championships, was a state champion wrestler and a champion weightlifter. So she's certainly got the credentials here. And she's up against a guy roughly the same weight in his 50s who was pretty fit, with about 9 months martial art experience. And I think the girl would have beat him easily, but in a series of 5 bouts, the girl won the first but lost the next 3. The much older, far less experienced man won easily against a girl who, in girl sports parlance at least, was about as elite as you can get. Now, there was also in a further match, there was a guy again who had maybe a few months' experience, but he was a sporty guy generally. He also, beat the girl, even though like she had 10 years' experience and he had very little. So pretty much any physically athletic, competitive boy can beat a girl at maybe some rare exceptions can beat a girl at any of these sports. So you really have to pick a very unathletic, very uncoordinated boy in order to give the girl a serious chance, or to make sure the outcome's preordained. The reality, in the real world, it's quite different. Now, a 14-year-old boys Dallas district soccer team, not even a national team, not a state team, they're just a local district team, beats the US women's national soccer team. This is the elite, the very best in the nation, and handily beats them. Or where in Australia, a 14-year-old boys local regional side, they're not even a city side, beats the Australian women's soccer team 7-0, for goodness sakes. So this is, they're 14 years old. So if you look at, say, tennis as an example, as a male tennis player who's in, I think he's in the 200 somewhere, and he thrashed the women's Wimbledon, 2 women's Wimbledon champions. Thrashed them. It wasn't even a close race. And even in between sets, he was smoking cigarettes, and he'd been out partying hard the night before and got up really early to play a round of golf, and he still got up and beat them handily. The issue here is that the boys make better athletes than girls in those physical sports, and champion boys will easily beat the champion girls. But that the utter insane madness of the Wokovics that can propagandise reality, putting unfit boys up against girl champions, and pretending it's an evenly matched game is quite absurd. And we're seeing, of course, the transgender side of it, where boys are competing against girls in a whole range of sports. You know, MMA, I think I mentioned the top of the card here, and this is you know, girls who work very, very hard to be the best in their sport, and it could be track and field sports, you know, sprinting or anything. It doesn't matter. They work really hard to get there and to be the best in their class, and by putting transgenders in there, they're in the same sports, to compete in the same sports, they're simply undermining the integrity of your sport, as they are in the reverse, trying to put unfit, pudgy boys up against super athletic girls. It's quite absurd and quite ridiculous. And I don't know why we allow it to happen, because it undermines our society, our confidence in our society, our confidence in ourselves. It's really part of that process that the globalists are inflicting on us, is to destabilize and undermine the entire fabric of Western society. You've been with Tassos today at your Pushback channel, and thank you for listening.